To celebrate this, the 400th episode of the Garden Basics podcast, today we're running the most listened to garden chats from each of the 100 episode seasons, including starting a victory garden, growing caneberries, container gardening basics, and planting and growing shade trees. It's historic. It's episode number 400 of the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. And yes, we're still podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon jungle in suburban Purgatory. Let's go. The Garden Basics podcast began during the early stages of the COVID crisis back in April of 2020, when you may recall people were being warned to stay home. All of a sudden, there were tens of thousands of new gardeners who wanted something to do at home, and we wanted to provide a little guidance so they could be successful new gardeners. So it's no surprise that the very first episode, Starting a Victory Garden 2.0, was one of the most listened to episodes in our audio catalog. Here it is. When the Victory Garden Manual was first written in 1943, it was pretty easy to come up with reasons to grow your own vegetables. After all, it was wartime. Food was scarce. And the food that was available may not have been the healthiest or the freshest because a lot of that was going to the war effort. People responded, and in 1943, nearly 40% of all fruits and vegetables grown in the United States were grown in-home and in community victory gardens. That's pretty darn impressive. Well, maybe it's time for Victory Garden 2.0. That's the thoughts of Diane Blazek. She's the executive director of All America Selections and the National Garden Bureau. And maybe in this time of coronavirus, Diane, we need to start our own gardens for many reasons, not the least of which is, hey, we might be sheltering in place. Give us something to do.
You're exactly right. Yeah, it's not only something to do, but any of us who have been gardening for a long time know that just getting out in the fresh air is such a well-being type of thing. You get out, you're getting vitamin D, you're exercising, and it just makes you feel good. It gives you a sense of accomplishment to work in your garden and grow your own produce. So yeah, there's many reasons why now is a perfect time.
It reduces stress. It increases the amount of healthy food that is available to you. You don't have to go to a grocery store for a lot of things now. So yeah, and this is the perfect time to get started on a garden, isn't it?
Oh, it really is. Yeah. I know that there are some areas of the country that have already been able to start. I'm in Zone 5. I'm in Chicago. So a couple weeks ago, I started some seeds in my basement, and it'll be a little while before I can actually harvest. But I think Audrey Hepburn had this great quote about gardening is a way that you're looking for the future. And I'm probably messing up her quote, and I apologize to her. But yeah, I think in this time, we need to be looking forward with a positive eye.
You know, getting back to the whole concept of Victory Garden 2.0, we should point out that there was a book back during World War II called The Victory Garden Manual, and the author of that book has something to do with the National Garden Bureau.
He certainly does, and it's such an honor to, bring all this back and talk about it again. So, Mr. James H. Burdett, he had worked for a seed company as well as being a newspaper journalist. He had the idea for National Garden Bureau back in 1920. So he launched this nonprofit organization as a way to disseminate gardening information to other journalists. And that is still the model we're using today. But then because the Victory Gardens came about in World War II in World War I, and then they had a resurgence in World War II, this book was published in 1943. So, he had to start working on this probably about the time of Pearl Harbor, and then published it in 1943. And it was just such a good guide for anybody who wanted to start their own victory garden.
And that's the place to start even here in the 21st century with some of the tips he wrote about in the Victory Garden Manual. And probably not the least of which is know where you are. You got to garden according to your zone. As this guy on the radio here locally often says, all gardening is local.
It really is. Yeah, that's a good tip. And just from being on social media and talking to people, a lot of them don't even realize you need to know your growing zone and what that means. So we put that first and foremost as the number one thing you need to know. Subsequently means you need to know your last frost date, which we put that further down the list, and probably they should be together, but I was just trying to do it in order, like step one, step two. So know your growing zone and know your last frost date are two top tips that we wanted to start with.
One of the more accurate growing zone maps for California does not use the USDA zones. What they use are called the sunset zones, and that would be from the Sunset Western Garden Book. And even though, the Sunset folks are falling on hard times like a lot of publishers are, the book is still available, and it is really a necessary reference for gardeners here to find out what you can grow in your specific area of California. In fact, if you look around, you can find the Sunset National Garden Book, which lists the zones throughout the entire country, almost like the Western Garden Book. So if you can find that book, that's also a nice book to have on your garden shelf. I guess, too, when it comes to planting your garden, and this is the time of the year to plan your garden and maybe plant it here in California, it would be next month for summer vegetables. In your part of the area, it's probably Mother's Day in May.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Probably for a family that's sheltering in place, make a list of the items your family enjoys eating.
Exactly. I mean, I gave an example to somebody else earlier that I said, if your family's not going to eat spinach, don't plant spinach. Plant something else where the space is at a premium. So you really need to grow what your family will eat. And you think also, okay, when all this produce comes ready and it's being harvested, what if you have too much? Do you have people you can share it with? Can you freeze it? Can you can it? So just take all these items into consideration when you're deciding what to plant and how many to plant.
Oh, boy, you sure touched on a sore point with me as far as people who grow gardens and then watch it go to waste. If you grew it, eat it. And the only way you can eat it when it's out of season is to preserve it. And I'm so glad that California's Cooperative Extension Program has master food preserver programs throughout the entire state. And they're a great go-to resource locally here for finding more information about to preserve what you grow.
They are an excellent resource. I heard them speak last summer, and I was just amazed at how progressive California's extension group is. They're very active.
And then, of course, you got to decide, do you want to grow it from seed or do you want to grow it from transplants? And for beginning gardeners, I always suggest, well, let's start off with the bike with the training wheels and do it from transplants. But you have some ideas as far as, okay, what plants do you choose that would be easier to grow than others?
Right. And maybe if you're a new gardener, you haven't heard the term direct sow. And speaking about is looking at some charts. And, it was not available back in 1943, but we have a lot of good online tools now that shows planting dates and days to harvest. You can always research, go online and Google number of days to harvest for a beefsteak tomato and see what kind of numbers you get. They will vary. And it depends if you're planting with heirlooms or hybrids. Some will be shorter, some will be longer. But yeah, that's very important. And I totally agree with you. It's a lot easier to just go to your local garden retailer and get transplants. But then there's other things that you may want to direct sow, and they would be quick crops, something like radishes or lettuce or spinach, something like that. So there's a lot of good options.
There are, unfortunately, the nurseries here in California, the retail nurseries are still open for business because they, too, are in the food business, and that's why they get to be open. And we're glad about that. Yeah, definitely. I would suggest, too, that if you're starting a vegetable garden for the first time, choose hybrid varieties over heirloom varieties. I mean, you can pick one or two heirlooms, but for the most part, keep it at hybrids because they usually will be more prolific, more productive, and they're easier to have success with.
Right. Because of the fact that I run the All America selections, we do plant trialing. And yeah, a huge majority of our new introductions are hybrids. And I say that same thing. For new gardeners, if you want to have more of a guarantee of success, plant the things that are going to be easier, that are going to be disease resistant. You don't want to put all that work and money into it and then just have them succumb to disease or something.
And as we mentioned, this is the perfect time to plan your garden. And what are some tips for planning your garden space?
The old traditional victory garden was typically done in a garden plot or, a certain size space in your garden. Not everybody has that anymore. So you really need to take a look at what kind of space do you have? Where is it located? Please, please, please make sure that it gets enough sun. I know that way too many people think, oh, maybe just a little bit of shade and I can plant it there. You're probably not going to be as successful. You can research. Yes, there are some things, maybe some leafy greens that'll grow a little bit of shade, but for the most part, you definitely need some sun. And then you just have to decide for yourself, are you going to tackle growing this in ground? Do you have some raised beds? Do you want to buy or make some raised beds? Or do you just simply want to, okay, I have a window box or I have this 16-inch container and I want to grow a little determinate tomato. Those are the things to take into consideration and go from there.
I guess we should define those terms because a lot of people get confused about it. Full sun is generally, ideally, more than 8 hours a day of direct sun. It could be 6 to 8 hours. Partial sun is 4 to 6 hours, and anything less than 4 hours is usually considered full shade.
Right. Yeah. So, and I agree with you. That terminology and which plants you can grow where, I'm glad you're adding in the California aspect because we try to think nationally, which is kind of hard because it is, like you say, it's local. So it's hard to put in all those little asterisks for different locations.
2 of your top 10 tips, you can almost combine into one. And you talk about companion planting, and you also say, don't forget to plan for pollinator-friendly flowers. And I tell you, a lot of your vegetables, when it comes to fighting off pests, if you've got pollinator-friendly flowers and perennials that attract beneficial insects, they can go a long way to reduce your use of pesticides.
Oh, absolutely. So you're killing a couple birds with one stone there by planting the flowers. But the reason we talk about the pollinator. I mean, yes, the pollinators need our help. We need their help. And I think a lot of people might have gone too far in one direction saying, well, I'm just going to do 100% vegetables, forgetting that they need pollinators to pollinate certain of their produce.
Exactly. Of course, soil is always an issue if you have poor soil. And some people think they have poor soil, but it really isn't. It just needs perhaps to be amended. And that's where composting comes in.
Exactly. And so great time now. You're at home and you're using some of the produce from the store and you need to get rid of the peels or the core, whatever the case might be. Start a compost pile. Super simple. You'll be so happy you will. Your garden will be better off.
And for the kids that like to play with worms, vermicomposting is catching on here in California, having a worm bin and then using all those kitchen scraps to feed them. And then what comes out of the worms is called worm castings, which is a great soil amendment.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great resources on how to build your own worm bins. I love that concept. If I had little ones, I would be all over that.
Anything else you want to mention here?
Our website, ngv.org, tons of information, a lot of additional links on our Victory Garden 2.0 blog. So spend more time in your garden than on your website, but the website will definitely give you plenty of resources to be successful.
Check local resources with the University of California Cooperative Extension. That would be the Master Gardener program in your area and the Master Food Preserver program. And you too can have a Victory Garden 2.0 to get us through this mess. Diane Blazek, she's the executive director of both the All-America Selections and the National Garden Bureau. Diane, thanks for a few minutes of your time.
Thank you very much, and happy gardening.
One of the sweetest backyard garden treats to grow? It's caneberries. That includes raspberries, blackberries, boysenberries. In episode 182, which aired back in April of 2022, Master Gardener Pam Bone took us step by step in how to successfully grow these berries. This, too, was one of the most listened to segments in the entire history of the Garden Basics podcast. If you want to be a successful berry grower, give this a listen. We're at the house of Master Gardener Pam Bone here in Sacramento County, and she loves raspberries, and you ought to see her raspberry garden. So today we're going to talk some raspberry basics, And Pam, this is a rather phenomenal stretch of raspberries you have here. It looks to be about 25 feet long and about 8 feet deep. But what I like is that you have incorporated rows between the raspberries so that you never have to reach more than 2.5 feet to pick the berry. So that was smart thinking of putting the rows that you can walk on to be able to reach.
That is really critical. Actually, it's really difficult. Otherwise, you don't get into the middle to harvest. It's hard for pruning later on. It's hard for pest control. It's really important. So what we did is we have some raised beds. They originally were 2x6s. They've sort of disintegrated over the years, but the soil has built up. And then between those raised beds, then we put down a lot of mulch. And over the years, it's raised up as well. And so what we have is pathways throughout the whole area, and you can reach and pick and harvest, and it's really easy to get to it, and it makes it a lot easier than a big solid block, and that is really important.
How adaptable are raspberries to the United States? Are there zone limitations?
Well, some people would tell you that they can't grow raspberries in Sacramento, that they have a really horrible time. And we've been growing raspberries here at our house for practically the whole time we've lived here, which is nearly 42 years. And there are certain varieties for certain locations. So you have to know what will do well here. You also have to know kind of location they require too. How much sun can they take? You know, you have to have sun in order to produce the berry itself. But here in our area, we have been planting Heritage and Oregon 1030, and those are varieties that are adapted to the heat. And the Heritage variety is still available everywhere. My daughter grows Heritage in Washington, in Pullman, Washington. So these are what we call the fall bearers or ever bearers, and they are a little bit different variety than the kind that you put up on a trellis and all, which actually they're much easier to prune and that. So yes, just go to your local cooperative extension or your nursery and find out what varieties are adapted to your area and what are their growth habit, and do you want that kind of growth habit? How much work are you willing to do with training them and pruning them and everything? So we've adapted very well here and produce huge crops of berries.
If you look at the picture that's with today's episode of Pam's raspberry bed, you see a lot of T-posts sticking up with a lot of wires. And judging by the heights of the wires, it looks like these raspberries get maybe 6 feet tall.
Oh, yes, definitely. They will grow at least that far. And then, in fact, sort of hang over. So I'd say they might even be 7 feet tall. They grow beautifully in our area, in the location that we have, and very vigorously. And we found that this system maintains them without having to do a huge trellis system, because what these are, they are pruned down, not to the ground, but to basically brown sticks in the winter months. And then the new spring growth comes up, and then it keeps growing, and then new growth comes up from the base to produce a fall crop. What we found is that it's almost like creating a little playpen for them. All you really need are wires that go around just to hold the berries inside so that they'll remain upright. So all we do here is you just come on over here, Fred, and you just move the berries as they grow into the wires, and then they're just held inside. And so we've got a center wire here too, so they won't flop. And it's a really ideal system. We found it works really, really well for this type of everbearer or fallbearer raspberry.
What's the spacing on these plants?
Well, what was the spacing on the plant?
Originally, and what is it now?
Yeah, right. Right now, they're probably, my husband just went and we harvest a lot of plants that come up in between the rows, and we have another little nursery area that's too much shade for very much berry production. So we then harvest and we place plants that die out. And I would say they're probably about maybe a foot apart or so. They probably started out back in the day about 2 feet apart, but no, this is a block system. It's okay for them to be a little bit crowded, but you can see there's some areas that are a little bit more open, and other areas that it's a little bit more compact and that. So I don't think you can really mess up with this system at all, and they can be fairly close together. Remember, raspberries send up nice little new plants all over the place, and so if you space them far apart, they're going to fill in on their own anyhow. So you don't have to crowd them when you first start.
This is being irrigated by a drip irrigation system. You have lines of 1/4-inch tubing. It looks like the emitters are spaced at 8 or 12 inches apart. And the lines themselves are maybe a foot apart each to ensure equal soaking of the soil. Are raspberries a thirsty plant?
They are. They do need even watering, regular watering. And we did find out kind of the hard way. We've always used a drip irrigation system, but back in the old day, before they had pressure compensating inline emitters, we had this laser tubing, and it just really produced a lot of water. And we wanted to be more efficient. And so even though it was on a drip system, we wanted to change to these new lines. And we found out we've got to put a lot more of these in here because these plants are thirstier than we thought. And that laser tubing was putting out a lot more water. Luckily, it puts that out very efficiently. But yes, I would say we do water these once a week. But when we do, they may have to run for 4 to 6 hours at a time, depending on the heat and how hot it gets in the summertime here, or what kind of a hot spell we're having, or whatever. We may then turn it on twice a week, but not run it quite as long. So I adjust it. But right now it's set for once a week, and I believe it's on for 4 hours.
All right. It's springtime when we're recording this, so those would be spring hours of irrigation.
Exactly. Right. And we increase it. What we want to do is increase the amount of water that is put on at any one time, so we're not doing any shallow irrigation. These roots are not extremely deep at all, not like a fruit tree or anything, but you do want to wet the soil down at least a foot to 18 inches and keep it moist. And we mulch. Everything is mulched, and a lot of compost over the top as a top dressing to save water, to keep the water into the soil. Try to be as energy and water efficient as we possibly can. But berries, I will say, just like any fruit crop in your landscape, if you really have to save water because you're in a drought or whatever, then get rid of your lawn, because you can't get rid of your fruit trees. And unfortunately, fruit trees, berries, and other things like that take just about as much water as a lawn, if not more. But look at what you're getting out of it.
You can eat the berries. It's kind of hard to eat grass.
That's exactly right. So we just keep reducing the lawn if we feel like we need to save water.
With all the compost and mulch you're using, what sort of fertilizer regimen do you need for raspberries?
Well, actually, we don't have to do much of anything, but once a year in the spring, we do over top dress with usually something high in nitrogen. Just like all fruits of all sorts, and we grow a lot of fruits in our landscape, they need nitrogen to grow and to produce fruit. People think, oh, you need phosphorus and potassium, but we've done a lot of soil testing in our area, and I worked for the Cooperative Extension for many years and saw a lot of soil tests come by. And for the most part, we don't see a lot of phosphorus and potassium deficiencies in our woody plants and our fruit trees. Our berries, they might need a little bit more because they don't have as extensive as a root system. So what I usually generally do is just buy something that is an all-purpose, higher in nitrogen fertilizer. As long as it doesn't have any kind of a weed killer in it, lawn fertilizer works just as well.
Yeah, exactly. There are a lot of good, starter lawn fertilizers that take their time to break down and can feed the plants for a much longer period of time. And actually, lawn fertilizers are a fairly good choice for a lot of massive plantings like raspberries here. And also, like you say, as long as you avoid the weed and feed products and just stick with the feed products, you're okay.
That's true. And actually, this year we did put on a lawn fertilizer. We went out and purchased, we needed some more for the lawn itself. And so I thought, well, let me look for one that is high in nitrogen, but has a little phosphorus and potassium and a little P and K in there. And that'll be good for the berry plants. We also, in addition, grow boysenberries as well. And so I needed something that we could do for those as well. And then we can just use the same old thing on our citrus and our apple tree and everything else. One fertilizer makes it a lot easier.
Raspberries, harvest time is when, and how do you harvest them, and how long can you store them?
Well, the berries, this particular variety, now remember, these are These are the 2-crop variety, and a lot of people may grow raspberries that only produce a spring crop. This one also produces the fall crop.
It's heritage, right?
Heritage is the one that you can find in the nurseries now, and it's pretty much everywhere. I think they sell it all over the United States. That particular variety then will start bearing a crop in late May, early June. And we'll get a pretty good crop then. In fact, actually, it might even be mid-May this year. It looks like some of the flowers are getting pretty well developed already at the ends. Now, this is a flower fruiting cycle where these are the old canes from last year that were cut down. And then the new growth that you see here is all from last year. As soon as these bear here in about another month and a half or so, then they are going to die back. And then all the new canes arising from below that are going to come up, they're going to produce then a fall crop. And I will say that it's kind of unpredictable, but most of the time our, quote, fall crop, and I should say fall with quotes around it because really the crop starts in August and it'll go till Thanksgiving easily in our area, unless we get a really cold snap.
So when that stem has produced berries, that stem should be removed?
We usually wait until it starts to look really dead and looks like it's not productive at all. And then we, cut it out. And the reason is we used to just leave them, but we found out that we had that mite problem when we had a little bit of drought stress. And we found that if it's too crowded, you don't get the air circulation, the leaves get dusty and dry, and mites love that. And we just found that it was easier just to remove it, open it up, and get rid of it. And then it left a lot of opportunity for the rest of the canes to come up and grow. And then those come up, then they fruit, and we get a great crop. I say the heaviest crop is mid-August to the end of September, a great crop. And I put up a lot of jam. So my husband has to pick. He does all the picking. I do all the putting up. My husband calls himself the gardener. I'm the horticulturist. We used to work together on a lot of this stuff, but now he's got me in the kitchen, putting all this stuff up. He then will harvest about every 5 days, because if you don't, two things will happen. The fruit will get soft and mushy, and then it'll stop producing. But the soft and mushy attracts a fruit fly that goes to our cherry trees as well here. And we haven't had a real problem the last few years if you're really careful with keeping it up. But sometimes if you let that particular fruit fly go wild here, it will infest the fruit with unknown little white maggots until you're making your jam, and all of a sudden there they are. So, and especially the fall crop. So we have to be really careful and really religious about getting rid of any fruit that's too soft or decayed or whatever. And
picking the raspberries, can you pluck them or do you have to cut them?
No, in these you just pull right off. They pull off very easily, and not a problem at all. And in fact, when we get down to the boysenberries, same thing. You can just pull them right off. You don't have to cut anything. And they're very easy to pick. They're not too, they're a little bit thorny, but, a little bit of prickles on them, but not too bad.
What does Mike the gardener use to store the raspberries as he's picking them? Does he have a big bag, or is he just carrying a bucket?
So what I do is I like them because to be in a colander. And so I have a lot of large metal colanders and some plastic colanders. That way there's more broad surface area. He brings them into the house then, and I kind of make sure that they are well distributed because I put them in the refrigerator. And actually, raspberries have a very, very long refrigerator life. They can easily stay in a refrigerator without having to put them up to do anything with them for 5 to 7 days and not see any decay or anything, as long as you've picked them without already having a problem with a soft fruit. I try to get to them, though, and put them up if I can within about 2 to 3 days. But if something happens and I get a little behind, it's really producing heavily, I can leave some of them in there. It works out really well, actually.
Anything else you want to mention about raspberries?
Well, I think raspberries are pretty easy to grow, and they're easy to prune and take care of. They produce a beautiful crop and make fabulous jam. You just have to be careful to attention for making sure you mulch, making sure that they don't ever suffer any kind of a drought. Keep them irrigated evenly without too much water. They are sensitive to root rot, and we have our soil is a heavy clay soil, and we do have a type of Phytophthora in our soil that does infect our raspberries occasionally. And we then, I've had it actually identified at a state lab to make sure. So what we do is we just make sure that we pull those out occasionally. And then I really watch the irrigation, make sure that we're not keeping it too wet or whatever. But we're still going to get a little bit of it because it's in our soil. And you've got a heavy clay soil, and even just normal spring or winter rains or whatever keeps the soil wet. And as soon as that fungus gets active, then you have to be careful not to keep it too wet. And so it's kind of walking a little bit of a fine line there with the irrigation. But otherwise, they're pretty carefree. Once a year fertilization is it, and the pruning doesn't take much time. And I highly recommend raspberries. They're fabulous, and they taste really good.
Well, let's walk over to the other berries and see what's growing. We are at Pam Bone's house here in Sacramento County. Pam Bone, famous Sacramento County Master Gardener, the original Sacramento County Master Gardener, by the way. And we are at her home where they have developed a yard for over 40 years, and Pam loves berries. Pam, it's almost like Knott's Berry Farm here. You've got boysenberries here.
Yes. I come from Washington State. My husband comes from Oregon State, and you have to grow berries, raspberries, boysenberries, whatever. Boysenberries are just ideal for making pies, and I make a lot of pies. They make a wonderful jam, and of course, they're delicious for fresh eating as well. And they love our Sacramento climate.
So does that mean that in a state like Washington, they wouldn't do well?
No, they do great there, too.
Oh.
They love it there. They do just as fine. So you just have to decide, do you have the sun for them? They just like full sun, and they do really well in that. They are very adaptable, actually.
Describe the trellis that you've designed for them.
Years ago, we had a massive system with the big wooden crossbars on it and the ones that you see commercially and all. And it's a pretty daunting thing, and it takes a lot of time and energy to install, and it's expensive. And one day we had a massive tree fall and literally destroy our entire berry patch here, including the crossbars. And so we decided, you know what, we're going to do this a little easier. And we're going to use these T-bars, these metal T-bars with wires, and it works just beautifully. It holds them nicely. We've got T-bars spaced out so that you've got not too much tension on the wire, or, too much stress on the wires here. And then we've got the 3-wire system so that the berries can be trained in 3 different locations and tied on with little twisty ties. And then we use kind of a barrel method, sort of where you come up from the base of the plant and then you go onto one of the wires and train the branches sometimes as a barrel loop if you've got a long enough cane, and they loop around, gives a little more maximum sun exposure for the plant. But yeah, these T-bars just work really, really well. They stay in the soil nicely, and you can see they turn in just a little on the edges just because some of the tension's late in the season, but you can twist the wire a little bit tighter, and it works great. And it's inexpensive, easy to do, and not so daunting.
For you technically minded at home, the T-bars are spaced about 8 to 10 feet apart, and there's a 3-wire system on here that looks like it begins about 18 inches above the ground, and the next 2 wires are also spaced by another 18 inches. And so the total height of this is maybe 4.5 to 5 feet.
Yes, and then some of the berries later in the season, then they'll stick up a little bit further and they'll lop over just a bit. But otherwise, this contains them pretty nicely, actually. You can see that we do have some canes that are growing past the wires, but for the most part, it works well for us. If you've got a really, really vigorous canes growing, then you might want to make a little bit taller.
And a little bit more support on the ends as well.
Exactly. That's true, too. If they get really heavy and laden down, then the wires then sag and that. And we get a little bit of that. But gosh, it's a really inexpensive, easy way to do it. And if for some reason you had to move it or adjust things or whatever, it's easy to do. This whole thing with the big wooden crossbars and people putting them in concrete and whatever else they do, it's like digging a fence and I don't know, a permanent structure may not be what you needed to have.
How do you care for boysenberries then? What are the watering requirements, the fertilization, and the pruning requirements?
Well, as far as watering goes, they need regular irrigation, at least once a week irrigation. We have a drip irrigation system using the inline emitters in rows down the berries themselves. We have 3 lines on each of the rows, so we encompass most of the root system. And then we want to make sure that we run that drip irrigation as long as water is flowing down into the root system. We want it to go down in as far as we can, which is going to be at least 12 to 18 inches is where most of those roots are contained. So you want to make sure that you run the irrigation long enough. I will say that I find that most people do not run their drip irrigation long enough, and they just dribble out a little bit of water. Then you get a very shallow root system. And what happens if you have a dry spell, you forget to water, something happens or whatever, then the plants really suffer. So watering is really critical. The other thing that we do is we put on a lot of wood chips. We get a lot of arborist wood chips that are delivered to us and put that on. And then we always top dress with compost. We have a lot of compost piles. We have a lot of oak trees and other trees that produce leaves. And plus, of course, I save all my kitchen scraps and that. And that compost then makes a wonderful top dressing. It doesn't completely eliminate fertilization, but it helps to give you a little bit of nutrition as well as keeping the soil moist and cool and helping to mitigate soil fluctuations in temperatures. And then it's going to help with your watering as well. So fertilizing then about once a year. Already did it just a few weeks ago, just as the growth is starting up in usually early March. Then we go in with an all-purpose fertilizer, or in our case, this year and in years past, we often just get an all-purpose lawn fertilizer, high in nitrogen, which these berries need, but it still gives you a little bit of phosphorus and potassium. But nitrogen, people don't realize that you've got to have the growth in order to produce flowers and fruits. And the fact that we're putting on a lot of mulch and a lot of compost on top, and that the soil in our area isn't real deficient in phosphorus and potassium, you don't need very much of it. You're going to get it from your mulch and your compost a little bit anyhow. So the nitrogen's the one thing that is transitory. You put it on and it flows right out with your waters. And you got to be careful not to overwater or you'll lose your nitrogen. So nitrogen's real important that it be put on annually for all fruits, whether they're bushes or vines or fruit trees.
Always a good idea to have your soil tested before you do any planting so you know exactly what your soil needs. There are a couple of inexpensive university-related soil testing sites that'll be glad to take your $20 and send you back a soil test report. One is the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and the other is Colorado State University. If you look up either of those universities and put in the words soil test, you'll get the details on how to go about that. And they're fairly complete soil tests, too. So that is a inexpensive option. Of course, you can always soil test for macronutrients and pH yourself. You can find those kits at any garden center or nursery. But yeah, know your soil before you plant anything. Are the boysenberries like raspberries? Once a branch produces, it's done?
Yes. And in fact, in this case, because our raspberries, I was saying earlier, are fall bears or ever bears, people call them, because they produce 2 crops. This produces 1 crop. We get a crop in June, and then that's it. And then those berries, as soon as they start to really dry back and look kind of crispy, you just remove them. Then the new canes are all coming up from the base of the plant, and we let them just sprawl on the ground while the others are dying back. Then we take them out and at some point then put the new ones up onto the trellis.
All right. Boysenberries, and what do you do with them? When do you harvest them?
Harvesting is in June in our area. Basically, they're pretty much finished by the 4th of July. We can usually count on the last crop just about then, and they will start producing about the first week of June. And you just come out and pick them. You pick them with your fingers. You don't have to use any kind of pruning equipment or anything like that. You just pluck them off, and they store very nicely in a colander in the refrigerator. And I make a lot of pies and jam with them, and we eat them fresh and just love them. They're great. Boysenberries are one of the most versatile berries and do well in a variety of climates as long as you have. They actually will tolerate the sun even better than raspberries. Full sun. They don't do well in the shade as far as, they'll produce a lot of vine, but who wants that? And then you do have to, one thing with boysenberries, like any blackberry, because they're a type of blackberry, is that they will send up errant blackberries, and you can get the blackberry mess if you're not careful, where the patch gets overgrown. So just go out there and make sure you tidy up the rows occasionally and dig out those ones. Otherwise, we don't find them becoming the jungle at all, unless you're just not keeping up with it.
Are there boysenberry varieties?
Boysenberry is a variety of blackberry. So there are nectar berries, which some people say boysenberries and nectar berries are the same. There are loganberries. There are alala berries. These are all types of berries that were developed from a blackberry. And then there are lots of just blackberries that are not crosses, but have been also genetically grown to produce different varieties of blackberries. So you can just get an ordinary blackberry. These are a larger berry, a little bit softer berry. I like them because I think they're better for pies and that. We did grow regular blackberries as well, but found they weren't to my satisfaction for baking with them and making jam. So we took them out and put in more boysenberries.
How daunting are the thorns on these?
You know, back in the day when we first put these in, the thornless berries didn't produce very well. They were not very good varieties. Now, I understand from a lot of growers and from the master gardeners that grow these at our Fair Oaks Horticulture Center that a lot of the thornless varieties are excellent now and do produce well. So we put in thorny varieties, and they're not that bad. I will say when we're tying them up, oftentimes you have to put tape or something on your fingers to prevent yourself from just getting little prickles into your fingers, but they're not that bad. And they just produce so well.
It is a little hard to be tying branches up to wires when you're wearing thick goat gloves.
You can't do that. That's the problem. And so doing something, and actually what works actually pretty well now, and I found that I like these, is just the little thin latex gloves you use for just clean up around the house and that. They actually work pretty well for being able to tie with those. And then you can replace them and they're cheap.
There you go. That's a good quick tip. We are in the boysenberry patch at Pam Bones' house. It looks to be berry delicious, he said punnily. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you very much, Fred. I enjoy sharing my crop with you.
Gardeners are saying very nice things about the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter. Tessie writes in to say, I'm going to try your coffee filter germination trick to get the pepper seeds to sprout sooner. Thank you for this very helpful information in your newsletter. Laura writes in and says, you and America's favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower, have made me a better and happier gardener with the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter. Tanya says, I subscribed immediately when I read your newsletter about the benefits of not pruning tomatoes. I don't do it, nor do two of my favorite French market gardeners, one of whom is a sixth-generation gardener in a long line of successful market farmers. Thank you. And Robin says, I work the help desk for my County Master Gardener program, and I find I'm sometimes overwhelmed by garden problems, disease, confusion, too much or not enough water, gophers, and I love the idea in one of your recent newsletters of keeping a gratitude journal based on daily walks in the garden. Thank you. The Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter comes out twice a week. The Friday edition is free for all subscribers. The Monday edition is available for paid subscribers. And by the way, your paid subscription to the newsletter supports not only the ongoing efforts to produce the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter, it also helps to keep this podcast freely available each week. Find a link to more information about the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter in today's show notes, or at our homepage, gardenbasics.net, or you could just do an internet search for the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter. And thank you for your support and encouragement to keep the good gardening conversation going. Even if you don't have a big backyard, you can successfully grow a lot of edible crops in containers on a sunny patio. No wonder this topic got a lot of listens, but there are tricks to doing it right. This is from episode 256 back in March of 2023. It's a primer on container gardening basics. There's a new book out, The First Time Gardener, Container Food Gardening. All the know-how you need to grow vegetables, fruits, herbs, and other edible plants in pots. It's written by Pam Farley, although the title page of her book says Pamela Farley, but I have a funny feeling she's only called Pamela when her mother might be mad at her or other people in her life. I thought so, yeah. Pam Farley has been gardening and writing, usually not at the same time, since she was in grade school. Those interests collided in 2009 when she started the website brownthumbmama.com. Oh, now it rings a bell with you. She's been documenting her home and garden tips. Now, millions of readers from around the world visit her site to learn about vegetable gardening, easy recipes, and making a non-toxic home. And when she's not gardening or writing, she's might be out camping or reading or otherwise avoiding housework, just like she's doing right now, talking to us about container food gardening. Pam, this is exciting, a book.
Thank you. It certainly is.
And it's a book that is very necessary in the 21st century. What with smaller yards and new gardeners, you combine the two, and what do you get? A lot of container gardeners.
Absolutely. It's the easiest way to get started.
If you know what you're doing, and it doesn't take much, and your book is a good guideline to get started with container gardening, because there are sure a lot of myths about container gardening, and we may get into some of that later on. And certainly in your book, you cover just about every type of food you can grow in containers. How about some general guidelines about growing in containers? What do you look for in a container?
There are some important things to keep in mind. And if you're on the internet at all, you'll see a lot of suggestions that are probably not safe for growing food. The important things that you want to think about when you're picking out a container, your container can be a soup can or an old wheelbarrow or a fancy pot that you bought at your local garden center. But you want it to be big enough for the mature plant. So you're not going to plant a lemon tree in a soup can, for example. You want it to be food safe. Now, this means that I don't recommend that you plant potatoes in a stack of old tires, for example, because there's just too darn many chemicals in those tires. And third, you want to make sure your container has good drainage, because if your seeds or your plants are in a pot that's full of water and the water can't drain out, then everything's just going to rot and you're not going to have any vegetables.
I think for the beginner gardener who is starting off in container gardening, it might be easiest to start with greens because they grow quickly. They don't take up much space. They're very malleable as far as being successful. They don't require too much sun or too much shade. But like anything in a pot, it requires drainage.
Mm-hmm. And a little bit of chard will produce and produce and produce. You better really like chard.
Well, chard, to me, chard is one of my favorite greens because in our hot climate here in USDA Zone 9, it's one of the few that will successfully grow in the shade in the summertime, and you can have year-round greens in your salad from the garden.
That's right. And I actually have several chard plants in the front and the backyard right now. So I agree.
I like one piece of advice you give there in choosing containers where you say, if you wouldn't eat out of it, don't grow in it. So kids, don't eat out of paint cans.
Exactly. Just because it's on Pinterest doesn't mean it's a good idea, folks.
Yes. All right. Well, that brings up a good point, though, and that is you can, if you're creative, you can use a lot of receptacles around the house for your containers as long as they have drain holes.
Absolutely. I have started seeds in a rotisserie chicken container from the store. Or when we first got married and didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, I grew herbs literally in soup cans on the windowsill. I just pounded some holes in the bottom with some nails, used a nail to punch holes in the bottom. Egg cartons, any kind of old colanders, things that you were going to donate or toss, lots of ways that you can repurpose them and use them for your garden.
I would think if there is one general rule of thumb when it comes to choosing a container, it's I would rather have a deep container than a wide container.
That's very true. There are some times when if you think about the shape of the food, you could get away with planting radishes in a shallow container, but of course, carrots are not going to work. I have not found an occasion yet where a container was too big, but you can have a container be too small. That doesn't mean the plant's going to die right off the bat. It just won't get as big as it could have, and it may not last as long, may not live as long as it would have because it doesn't have enough room to grow and get nutrients from the soil.
One of the problems of growing a small plant in a large container, though, sometimes can be there's just way too much water in that container for that itty-bitty plant. And so it better be an easy draining soil for it to succeed.
That's true. And another good point, because you don't want to scoop up garden soil and plop it in a container for most of us, I should say. Most of us, our garden soil is pretty heavy. In this part of the state, it's got a lot of clay, doesn't drain well. Better to mix up or purchase specific container gardening soil that's a little lighter and drains better.
The one lesson I've learned after all these years of potting soil is, like you say, it really doesn't matter. You can choose your favorite potting mix or the least expensive potting mix. Just be sure it is moist before you plant in it. It is very difficult to moisten dry, commercially bought potting soil because one component that's probably in it is peat moss, and peat moss is very difficult to get wet unless you pre-moisten it. And one thing I like to do is if I'm using a bag of seed starting mix, which I really enjoy doing, especially this time of year, is I will dump it into a bucket, no drain holes in the bucket. Fill the bucket full of water with the seed mix in it. Walk away, do something else, come back either later that day or the next day and transfer that potting soil or that seed starting mix into pots with drainage and let them drain a while and then grab a handful of it and throw it into whatever I'm going to plant.
Perfect.
One thing you point out in your book that I would like to emphasize is a lot of people are in the habit of having a large container, and maybe it's one of those large, lightweight containers that look like they're terracotta, but they're not terracotta. They're really foam, and they're really light and easy to move. So maybe they don't want to put it full of potting soil and they'll throw styrofoam peanuts or pot shards in the bottom of it just to maybe save some money. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and not the least of which is you've just created a serious drainage problem.
So this is one of those things that's all over the internet, and holy smokes, everybody thinks this is the best thing since peanut butter, and I'm going to put some empty 2-liter bottles or some packing peanuts in the bottom of the container. And this is a common garden myth that has absolutely been busted. And there are some important reasons why you do not want to do this. For starters, your plant will not have enough soil to get enough nutrients. The roots might reach down, and then if the roots touch, 2-liter bottles and packing peanuts, they're going to be like, well, I don't know. Okay, I'd give up. It's going to change the balance of your pot, so it'll be a lot easier to tip over if there's wind or things like that. And the most important part, this is the science part, the soil has a specific density and the filler material below does not. Well, the water doesn't want to travel between those two porosities. The water is going to try and stay in the soil, which leaves the soil waterlogged, which is what you were trying to prevent, which is detrimental to your plants. You are concerned about having a heavy pot, a heavy immovable pot. They have little plant skateboards called plant caddies that you can set it on before you fill it with soil and zoop it all around wherever you'd like.
Here's a lesson I learned the hard way on that. I was doing a demonstration for some old garden show on the HGTV network years and years ago, and I was demonstrating how to plant in a wine barrel, in a half barrel, and drilling the holes and filling it. And they brought along one of those plant caddy casters with it. Mm-hmm. And I looked at it and go, well, it's kind of small, but we can give it a shot. And I set the barrel on top of the casters, and it's going to demonstrate how easy it is to roll. And this is with soil and a plant in it. And I think I moved it about 6 inches when the whole thing just collapsed. So the lesson I learned is if you're going to put a barrel on casters, get yourself something really heavy duty like a furniture dolly to put it on.
Yes, I've got at my local garden center, I got a plant dolly or plant casters that were made specifically for wine barrels and cost as much as the wine barrel. It's the right diameter and it's got like 6 or 7 legs spread out. So it's very sturdy.
Oh, that's nice. And they have wheels like a shopping cart?
Yeah, it's like, it's a caster thing with did it have a support caster in the middle? I don't remember, but it did have one on each end. It was very sturdy and very expensive.
And if you do plant in containers, that's another benefit of planting in containers. If you have, let's say, a citrus tree in there and there's a frost expected, you can roll it closer to the house to get a little bit more heat at night.
And that is probably easier than covering it and uncovering it or trying to figure out if your Christmas lights can keep it warm enough or those kinds of things.
So tell us about the containers that you use in your food garden.
I have just about every different kind. One of my favorite containers that I have quite a bit of in the front yard are smart pots, which are sturdy fabric pots with handles. And I have them lined up next to the driveway where they get the best sun. I've got some chard and some broccoli in those right now. I've got a few shallow terracotta containers that I think the folks next door gave me when they moved away. And I've got green onions in those at all different stages of growth. I have harvested green onion seeds for ages. So every few weeks I fill up another container and sprinkle some green onion seeds in there. So I'm always prepared. So of course, half wine barrels. Let's see. I have an orange tree in one. I've got a couple with blueberries. And I do have some of the traditional resin, the pretty decorative containers, mostly smart pots, though. I would say by number, they win hands down.
I use it. I've purchased them. I would purchase them again. They last for years. And they don't create root problems either. They air prune because of all the microscopic holes in them. And I just did a test comparing smart pots to a ceramic pot and a fiber pot growing roses. And I grew roses in them, a rose plant in each of them for a year, and then mercilessly killed those roses off just a couple of weeks ago because I wanted to see the roots of the plant to see what they look like. Mm-hmm. And the root system of the smart pot grown rose bush had 4 times the weight. And that's just the root part of it compared to the fiber pot. So it encourages roots. You don't get any circling roots and they don't find their way out and anchor themselves in the ground either. So I was impressed with the size of the roses too that were grown in the smart pots versus the fiber pots as well.
Awesome. Yes, I used smart pots for years and wouldn't have mentioned them specifically except that I'm real happy with them.
Yeah, I'm like I said, they last for years. There are people who have been using them for 20 years or so.
Cool. Yep. Well, that'll be me.
Well, yeah, you save things.
Years from now.
Yeah. I'm still using the original ones I used 8 years ago. So there's that. Getting back to the subject of drainage and using pots, one of the big problems with using pots is because of their weight, and you set that pot on the soil, there's a good chance it might clog those holes, that soil. Or if there's concrete below it, there's a chance that those holes could just become clogged, period. And you have some ideas on that as far as using maybe pot feet or pot toes.
Absolutely. So there are a few different reasons that the drain holes can get clogged. Of course, there can be roots or the soil just gets compacted or, there might be some buggos down there clogging up the holes. And there are a few different ways to handle it. There are fancy little lift gizmos called pot toes or pot feet that you can use that raise the container up off the ground just a little bit. 1/2 inch is all you really need. Or you can use the very fancy piece o' brick, which is a highly scientific method, or a little scraps of wood, things like that. If you raise up the pot and you find that the water is still not draining right, then the soil could be compacted. Probably want to gently tip the container over, then use a chopstick or an old pencil and poke the drain holes a little bit from the bottom up to break up the soil and get things to drain better.
Let's talk a little bit about container aesthetics. Now, I have no sense of design, but I know most people do. Where would you use cylindrical containers or square containers or rectangular containers in the garden for it to look nice?
So I confess that I am a vegetable gardener and not a landscape designer on purpose, because my fee criteria is, will the food grow in this container? Yes. Okay, good. So I actually had to consult with some friends who know what they're doing in that regard. And there are some things that can help you arrange your vegetable garden so that it looks the best. Obviously, there are a bajillion different sizes and shapes of containers. Like I keep talking about the soup cans on my windowsill, and there are beautiful decorative containers at the garden center, and there are 5-gallon buckets from the bakery. So there's all different shapes and sizes. There are some things that you can consider for aesthetics and placement so that your garden looks as aesthetically pleasing as possible, especially if you're doing container food gardening in the front yard and you might be concerned about what the folks across the street or the neighbors walking their dog might have to say. So if you have a cylindrical containers, so like the half barrels, the pretty decorative urns or containers from the garden center, those look great in the corner of the yard, or maybe if you don't have a tree in the center of your yard, you can use one very large striking container as a focal point. If you have several wine barrels, you can use them as a border or a more rustic look. So square containers, which sometimes if you're upcycling different things or if you're building your own wood boxes, because they're square, they have to be placed more precisely. They can be, depending on the material they're made out of, they're more modern looking, more sleek. Some styles of houses, it would look discordant to have a craftsman style house with a metal watering trough planter, or sometimes it's just incongruous.
I'm glad you mentioned metal watering troughs, because it is one of my favorite containers to use for growing blueberries. Since blueberries require an acidic soil mix, it's easy to do it in a cattle watering trough that you may have purchased at a farm supply store, as long as you put drain holes in it. But I've been seeing a lot of people using those containers as all their containers in the front yard. And if they're unpainted, if they're that bright silver, it's kind of garish looking. What's nice is those metal watering troughs usually can be painted with tractor paint because it sticks better to metal. And there's like 3 or 4 good colors when it comes to tractor paint. You've got, Ford blue, John Deere green. You've got Ford blue, International Harvester red, Kubota orange, things like that. And it just adds some nice bright colors to those rather stark looking watering troughs.
Exactly. I haven't seen around town, but I have seen online folks that, we ripped out our entire front yard and put in these industrial cattle troughs. And then, oh golly, guess I'm not quite that brave yet, but it can be done.
Oh yeah, it can be done. One thing we should talk about when it comes to containers is the fact that maybe the darker colored ones might just be absorbing too much heat on a hot summer day.
That is definitely a possibility, especially here in Zone 9 where we're cooking with gas all summer.
Yes, indeed. What can a mother do? What can a gardener do for lowering the temperature on a hot summer day? A black plastic pot. I hope that you have moved beyond black plastic pots, but if that's all you have, I understand. But there are some mitigations to bring the temperature down in those containers in the summertime.
I would say yes. If all you have are black plastic containers, perhaps you can put them inside a larger decorative container and use a cache pot is the term for the fancy outside container. Which disguises a more plain inside container.
And that would certainly bring the temperature down. If you're trying to bring down the temperature of a black plastic pot in the summertime and not cook the plant that's in there, because it can reach 140 degrees in as little as a half hour if the sun is hitting that black plastic pot on a hot summer afternoon. Putting it inside a larger pot is a great idea. Even better is to put it in that larger pot and then fill that gap, that air gap, with like mulch, wood mulch there to give it some more insulation from the heat. Now, there are some people who will wrap the outside of the containers with a reflective substance like aluminum foil, and that will work. That will keep the temperature down in the pots. But then again, your neighbors may think you're signaling the UFOs where to land.
Exactly. That could be a problem.
In your book, the First Time Gardener series, Container Food Gardening, you have some great pictures, lots of great pictures, as a matter of fact, but you have a good set of pictures that delineate exactly how to drill holes in the bottom of a wood barrel. And you can refer to that if you want to figure out how to do it. I always get confused, though, about when somebody gives me a pot that doesn't have drain holes. All right, I'm going to have to put a drain hole or two in this. How do I do it? Which drill bit do I use?
I know my way around power tools a little bit, but I tell you, it pained hubby greatly to be taking the pictures while I was drilling these holes, because he was like, oh, what about, hey, but there are different kinds of drill bits that you need to use and different techniques. Wood is pretty easy. You just use a standard drill bit. But if you're drilling like terracotta, you need a masonry bit. My best suggestion if you're doing glazed ceramic is only buy them if they already have drainage, because they are very expensive. And if you drill through with your expensive diamond tipped drill bit and then you break the pot, you are going to be mad. And of course, if you're doing the big metal trough, like I've seen, then you need a metal bit and you have to go really slowly because it's going to heat up. It's tricky, but it can be done.
Yes. And wear eye protection.
Absolutely. That is, yes. It needs to be said every time.
My wood boring drill bits are my best friend. They have the centerpiece of my pegboard in the garage. And they range from about a 1/4 inch diameter up to 1.5 inches. And for barrels, I like 3/4. You talk about, I think, 1/2 inch, and that's fine if you do enough of them. And the nice thing with wood barrels is you're not going to break the wood barrel.
Exactly. Yes.
Any first-time gardener is going to have issues. That's okay. You're gardening. It's fun. And for a lot of people, the first garden is their favorite garden, no matter what happens. But you may have issues. And in Pam Farley's book, the First Time Gardener series, Container Food Gardening, she has a troubleshooting guide. And Pam, your plant problems section tackles problems with the plants, and not only a lack of production, but also stems and leaves and what they look like, the leaves.
Exactly. So one of the things that was really important to me in writing this book was that I wrote it for the beginningest beginner. There are so many people have come to me and said, I think this is a silly question, but there's no such thing as a silly question. There's no question that's too basic, which is why in the book I talk about how do I plant a seed? I show pictures, step-by-step pictures. How do I plant a seedling or a transplant from the nursery? Not everybody knows that, and there's nothing wrong with not knowing it.
If you've never done it before, how could you expect to know?
Exactly. I was talking with a friend who's an expert seamstress, and I needed her to replace a zipper. And she said, well, that's easy. That's not a problem at all. You don't know how to replace zippers? And I said, oh, good heavens, no, all I can do is hem things. And then we were talking about gardening the next time we got together. And I said, well, just put it in your compost bin. And she said, I don't know how to make compost. And I thought, well, that's as easy as pie. How can you? But if you don't know, you don't know, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I still don't know how to replace zippers either, but that's all right.
That's why God made Velcro.
That's why we have friends that know how to do these things, right?
Exactly.
It all comes together.
It wouldn't be the same if everybody knew everything.
Right? Yes. And that would be boring.
In your experience with first-time gardeners, what are their usual panicked questions?
A lot of the time, so I have seen, again, online and with friends, the first time a corner of a leaf changes color. Oh no, the corner of this leaf, it's yellow. And and it's my plant dying. No, your plant has like 500 million leaves and it's going to be okay. But I've included some pictures of leaves and sick plants and sick leaves. So you can say, oh, my zucchini plant, it looks like there's flour or white powder on the leaves of my zucchini plant. What's that? And you can look in the troubleshooting section and it says, oh, white powder on leaves. Well, that could probably be powdery mildew or another fungal infection. Here are some things you can do. Or, well, there's squiggly lines on the leaves of my pepper plant. Well, you can look up squiggly lines. That is probably a leaf miner, which is just a bug that likes to go through and munch through the leaf and makes little squiggly lines. Not the end of the world. Not going to kill your plant unless it gets carried away. That's something that's different with this book is you don't have to know what the problem is before you look in the troubleshooting section. You don't have to look at this and say, well, maybe that sun scald, or maybe it blossom end rot, or maybe you don't have to know those things. You can just look and say, there's this white spot on my bell pepper, and you can look it up that way.
What I like too about your solutions is you start with the least toxic alternatives, an integrated pest management approach.
Always.
Always, always, always. And your garden hose could be your best friend when it comes to controlling insects like aphids.
Definitely.
Just spray them off. Yeah, always start with the least toxic alternative. And a lot of people, too, when it comes to garden problems like a yellowing leaf or some sort of spots on fruit, for example, they may say, oh, the plant needs water. Not necessarily. Always check the container for its own moisture. Get yourself a moisture meter or stick your finger down there and see what the moisture is like 8 inches down where the roots tend to be.
And one of the things that surprised me when I was researching is blossom end rot is something that comes up in the summertime enough, where the base of your tomatoes gets black or leathery. And I learned that sometimes, not always, sometimes it can be caused by fertilizer that has too much ammonia. Interferes with the way that the plant takes up the water in the soil. And so if you can use a natural fertilizer like kelp or fish emulsion, it's going to be easier on the plant and you'll run less risk of ODing on chemicals.
In the world of horticulture, when discussing blossom end rot, we usually like to say it's an abiotic disorder. And what that means is it's probably your fault because it's too much water, not enough water, too sandy of a soil, wrong pH of the soil, too much fertilizer. There's a lot of reasons that it could be.
That's funny, yeah.
And I can tell you don't own a nursery because you haven't tried to sell anything yet to solve these problems.
That's true. I just take the offending tomatoes and chuck them in the compost bin and think, doggone it.
Those are the salad tomatoes. You cut off the bad portion and eat the rest.
You can very much do that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I like the fact that you put in there not to add Epsom salts, eggshells, antacid tablets, or anything like that in your container garden. It's not going to fix blossom end rot.
I would like to have just printed that on the cover in 50-point font, but they frown on that kind of thing. There are some garden myths that I just can't stand, and that's one of them.
We have done entire episodes on this podcast about blossom end rot. You can look it up and listen for yourself and realize that, oh, I'll just live with it.
Yes, it is not the end of the world. And golly, around here, the tomatoes grow so well that if you lose one or two, you're going to be okay.
That's right. And congratulations. You put in a picture, a really good picture, too, of a teenage ladybug, which looks totally different than the mature adult ladybug. Most people know that ladybugs are good guys and gals. You want them in your garden to be eating the pests like aphids. But that teenage ladybug, I always like to say it looks like somebody in a San Francisco Giants warm-up jacket. It's black and orange.
Like a dragon or a dinosaur. Yeah, yes. They're super cool looking, but if you don't know what they are, you might think, oh my gosh, a bug.
Yeah.
And squish it.
Identify all pests before you take action.
Wise decision.
Especially in their younger stages because they can look totally different. And it's usually just like in real life, it's the teenage ladybugs that eat the most aphids.
The teenagers, yes. I can confirm this with the teenagers in my house.
Yeah.
The teenagers eat more than everything.
That's right.
So another thing that is really helpful for new gardeners is you might look at the vegetable drawer in your fridge and say, oh, well, I know we go through a lot of cucumbers, green beans, and lettuce. Oh, shoot. Now I have to try and figure out what kind of containers to get and how big and what if they go together and what if they don't. And so the book has like a quick planting guide for vegetables, fruits, and herbs. So you can think about what your family uses and you can look at this cheat sheet and say, oh, well, green beans, we need a 3-gallon or larger and they're going to need full sun. So, okay, I know that I don't want to plant them with chard because chard's going to want a little bit of shade. And I definitely wouldn't want to plant them with something that needs full shade. So you can look at the chart, figure out what kind of containers you need. So you're ready when you go shopping and you know when to plant everything, what size container it needs, whether you want to plant it from a seed or a seedling or a transplant. Some plants, they don't grow as well when they're planted as a transplant or a seedling. Garden center will sell them to you, but they might not survive. And then you'll feel bad and it's not your fault.
Yes, that's so true. Yeah, the quick gardening guide is excellent in your book because you go on a plant-by-plant basis describing the container size that's needed, when to plant, whether you can plant from seed or whether you need to grow from a transplant, how much sun it needs, how much water it needs, fertilizer if it needs it, and also how long it'll be until harvest. And that's always important.
Very important, yes. And it's worth pointing out that this is a book for beginning gardeners. So things that I at least find more challenging to grow, like broccoli and jicama, are not going to be in this beginner guide, but I do talk about them on my website.
You do cover fruit trees as well.
I do, because I have 8 at last count in my city garden.
Congratulations.
City backyard.
How tall do you keep your fruit trees? Are they in containers?
Some of the citrus trees are. The apricot is out front. I just got a couple of apples, and some of the citrus are in the ground and some are in containers. And they all top out at about 8 feet.
Good for you.
Pretty trimmed.
All right. That's called backyard orchard culture, where you keep the trees no taller than what you can reach because any fruit that's out of your reach is for the birds.
Yes.
And you even have instructions on how to grow an avocado tree. You're an evil, evil person for suggesting that.
I know it can be done because Carrie Stokes has one.
Yes, she does. Oh, avocados. Where do I begin? I tell you what, folks, if you live in Santa Barbara, if you live in Oxnard, if you live in San Diego, go ahead, grow your avocado trees. For anybody else in California, find the warmest spot possible that doesn't get a lot of wind, a lot of reflected heat, and you too can grow an avocado tree in USDA Zone 9 and 10. But there are times when you just can't do it, and it's really depends on the layout of your home and your yard. And can you grow avocados indoors? Go ahead and try. Who am I to stop you?
Well, we do talk about microclimates in the chapter about sun and locations. I would argue that you need a very specific microclimate to grow avocados in Zone 9.
Or you buy the home that's for sale next to Oprah in Santa Barbara. Yeah.
Ha! Well.
Pam Farley, it's been a treat talking to you.
I'm tickled to be here, Farmer Fred. Thank you so much.
Who doesn't love a good shade tree in their yard? But how do you plant and care for a shade tree? After all, a shade tree is an investment that can add thousands of dollars of value to your yard. Apparently, enough gardeners thought so. It made our March 2024 interview with consulting arborist Gordon Mann the absolute most listened to segment in the history of the Garden Basics podcast. Do you have trees on your property? Well, trees are usually the largest and longest-lived natural features on your property. Plus, they're worth a lot of money when you go to sell your home, so it pays to take care of the trees on your property. But do you know how? Well, if you don't know how, that might be the time to call in a consulting arborist, especially if you think that there's going to be problems if you see the tree leaning, or maybe branches are starting to break, or there is some unusual shedding of bark or something like that. You want to call in a consulting arborist. Well, what is a consulting arborist? Well, let's check in with Gordon Mann. He happens to be a consulting arborist, and he has a company called Man-Made Resources, serving Northern California for residences, businesses, agencies. He's been doing it for more than 3 decades, and he wants your trees to succeed. But the only way those trees can succeed is if you do the right thing and treat them right. And as I've been saying on this program for how many years now, it's all about the soil. And that's so true when it comes with trees as well. Gordon, a pleasure talking with you. And I hope we can shed some light for people to help them take better care of their trees.
Thank you, Fred. I appreciate the opportunity to share some information with you. And actually, I've been doing this for about 45 years. And 7 years ago, Man-Made Resources shifted our consulting to California Tree and Landscape Consulting, Cal TLC, and that's where the consulting comes from. I also, in July, started the Institute for Soil Genomics for Healthy Community Forests. And the idea is to help people learn how to get our soils back to their natural form.
And I bet right now people are wondering, well, wait a minute, what is a consulting arborist? So why don't you explain the difference between a regular arborist and a consulting arborist?
So a consulting arborist should be someone with enough experience to come out and make an inspection on the property or the trees and figure out what any of the issues are that are impacting the tree health or the tree conditions. Usually the consulting arborist is not part of a tree care company because most tree care salespeople show up to your property to sell tree work. There are several of them that will give some consulting out, but their job is to sell tree care. Otherwise, the company goes out of business. Nobody can just keep giving free information and stay in business for their careers. So we do charge for our independent, unbiased inspections of the trees and the most scientific ways to help the trees grow and stay healthy. Or if the trees have some issues, how to treat the issues. And instead of just saying the trees have to be trimmed or have to be removed, we give options and mitigation options for any issues on the property.
And just like you would visit a doctor regularly or a dentist regularly, if you have trees on your property, and especially if they're full-grown trees that could be worth thousands of dollars when the time comes to sell your property, you might want to call in a consulting arborist every few years to just do a general survey of your urban forest.
I agree with you, and I'm not just trying to sell our work, but any asset that we have requires some kind of preventative maintenance or regular maintenance. We think about all the things in our homes, in our cars, and we do things to take care of them. No one drives their car until the engine seizes because they never change the oil. And trees being a very valuable asset to our property and part of the community canopy are very important and do need to be inspected occasionally and help the property owners learn how to manage their trees, structure, and health in an appropriate manner.
And to find a consulting arborist near you, there are a couple of good resources out there that can help you pinpoint somebody locally who can help you out. I know there's the International Society of Arboriculture with their website, treesaregood.com, where you can find a list of arborists and consulting arborists. But also there's one specifically for consulting arborists, the American Society of Consulting Arborists.
Both those have arborists that are either certified or with ASCA registered consulting arborists that can help you inspect the site and give you the information you need to take better care of your trees. And hopefully the person that comes out is talking to you about growing better trees and keeping your trees healthy and helping you understand what we can do to avoid unplanned failures as much as possible. None of us are able to look completely below the ground, but we can look at differences in the site conditions, the tree trunks, and sometimes the roots. And what we normally do is we make as much assessment as we can from what we can visually see from the ground. And then if we come up with some things that we need more information on, there's called advanced assessments, where people might go up in the air and climb the tree to do an aerial inspection and look at what's up in the branches close up, or actually excavate the soil so those of us without X-ray vision can actually see the roots. Also, we have things we can do like tomography or resistance drilling and find out what level of decay is in trunks that might have no apparent openings that we can see inside, but sound hollow. And we use a mallet to check the quality of the wood.
The American Society of Consulting Arborists, their website is asca-consultants.org. And we'll have a link to both the American Society of Consulting Arborists and the International Society of Arboriculture in today's show notes as well. I know you've been going around giving presentations on tree health, and I'm amazed at the resiliency of trees, how even though to the naked eye they might appear to be healthy, they could be stressed because they were started poorly, and not the least of which is when they may have been planted when the housing development you live in was finally developed. Usually the landscape goes in as the very last thing after all the construction work, and that initial landscape is being installed on compacted soil and maybe very little topsoil just because of the construction process.
Yes, Fred, it's really sad how when we look at the difference in how trees have grown in our communities from 50 years ago to current, they used to build individual houses. They didn't scrape the entire site, all the topsoil off and compact it so they can build the houses so they don't settle. And then they come in with 4 inches of topsoil and try and get the trees to grow. I hope some of your listeners have actually had the opportunity to walk into wildland areas or forests. We have so many national forests in our area and county forests and things like that, where we can actually see how trees grow naturally. And hopefully they walk across a duff layer that is a tree's natural fertilizer, a natural way to restore the soils with the elements that it needs to function properly. So soils and soil genomics are very like the human gut. There's so much more information now about the biomes and things going on in the human gut that help our bodies care for themselves. The soils are the exact same way. And there's so many fungi and bacteria in the soil that help promote earthworms and other things that are happening in the soil that sometimes you need a microscope to look at. And when we scrape the organic matter off the top of the soil and we compact it, then it eliminates a lot of how those organisms can grow. It changes the soil porosity and permeability. It changes the soil aeration. And most people just think that tree roots need water, but roots need both air and water because they're living cells and cells need oxygen. And most of the microbiomes in the soil are not anaerobic, so they also need oxygen and air. And so what we try to do at the Institute is we do actual soil tests, not the normal one that goes through the local cooperative extension agencies and some of the soil testing we do that just talks about the elements in fertilizer, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium and pH. But we actually look at up to 120,000 microorganisms, both bacteria and fungi, and what's missing. And it looks at what's nutrients that are actually tied up in the soil and unavailable to the plant because the bacteria and fungi that help the roots extract it from the soil are damaged or missing. And the other thing humans do really well is we clean our soil and we rake and all the organic matter and all the leaves and any loose organic material off the soil. And that does two things. It protects the soil from the sun. So what we have otherwise is baked soil that's kind of like a brick. So anytime we get water, it usually runs off until the soil gets so saturated that it finally does soak in a little bit. Or it does just run off and it never goes deep into the soil. And because the soil is baked, the organic matter and the fungi and bacteria that are in the shallow areas of the soil that normally replenish the soil are actually either killed or lost. And we have very poor quality soils.
Earlier on, you mentioned the word duff, and some people are probably thinking, why is he talking about a fictional beer from The Simpsons? The duff, it is another word for mulch, and it's the fallen leaves, the small branches that basically can carpet a forest floor, which is their mulch. It's an actual mulch, just like we're always talking about the benefits of mulching your garden because it moderates soil temperature, it moderates soil moisture loss. It helps aerate the soil as it breaks down. It builds up the microbiology in the soil. And also, when you get a heavy rainstorm, that layer of mulch can also help break up the impact of the water on the soil, because on bare soil, when it rains really hard, it actually compacts the soil, removing the air. So that duff layer, that mulch layer, helps that water more slowly trickle into the soil. So it penetrates deeper too. Besides, don't rake your forest. Maybe reconsider those leaves that are falling from your trees every fall. I've gotten into the habit of collecting the neighborhood oak leaves and grinding them up with either a mulching mower or my weed whacker and spreading it around my garden to help improve the soil during the winter if I'm not planting a cover crop.
Yeah, Fred, you've got such a great method of the least expensive way to care for your soils. Most tree care companies, when they grind up the chips, we can still get them to drop them off at our house for almost for free without having to haul them away to the dump. And wood chips around trees are the best. And the natural organic matter of whether it's a crop, a plant, or a bush or a tree is what those plants are used to growing in normal nature. And as humans, we think we're doing the right thing by pulling them out. And we have this great behavior as humans of treating everything like they're human. We do all these similes and things of, or how nature would act as a human is probably a better way to put that. And it's not correct. And there's also some new mulch products out there that people can use, such as nut husks and hazelnut and maybe butternut. We don't want to use walnut because they have some allelopathy to them, which can be a little bit aggressive to other competing plants. But the other ones are creating a nice mulch layer that we could put over the soil and actually do the breakdown of organic matter like you're talking about. And unfortunately, when we add mulch, it's not a one-time done. We have to add mulch again after it breaks down. But that's what helps keep the soil in a well-functioning condition.
You've been going around doing demonstrations and talks about the healthy soil for healthy trees, and you talk about the basic building blocks for cultivating a healthy tree life. What's in that soil for a healthy tree? Water, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, iron, manganese, zinc, copper, boron, molybdenum. All right.
Yeah, and there's exopolysaccharides, ESPs, cider-O4s.
But what's interesting is all of those soil elements can be accomplished with organic matter.
Correct. Humans are so used to taking 2 tablets and call me in the morning and give me a pill to take care of what I'm doing that we think that by fertilizing our trees, we're helping with the exact same thing.
Now, we're not talking fruit trees here. We're talking ornamental trees. Yeah,
ornamental trees, right.
Okay.
And even fruit trees, there's some fertilizers that are specific towards improving the fruit production. And that's different than just trying to throw extra nitrogen and stuff in the soil to get it to grow faster.
And we have talked about nitrogen on this program, about how it does spur new weak growth that's very attractive to insect activity and not necessarily good insects either. And the same is true if you start adding fertilizer to a tree that doesn't need fertilizer. If it's got that layer of leaves on the ground, that's enough to feed that tree, isn't it?
It usually is. And again, because we start with soil that was not natural and then we're changing it, that some of the things in the soil are not there. And trees typically only need 2 things, water and organic matter. The organic matter will break down and improve the soils and help the roots do their job and help them break down what's in the soil and free up the elements that they need to grow. And by creating enough organic matter, which builds up the bacteria and the fungi in the soil and the biodiversity, helps the trees be more healthy. But typically the humans think we want something to turn around overnight. And so we don't give the soil the chance to do the long-term development that it needs. That's going to eliminate the need to do all these shots of nutrients that we get from fertilizers.
Let's talk about your travels throughout Northern California and assessing especially backyard trees, residential trees. What are most of the problems you're seeing associated with those trees?
The biggest problem we saw was a result of the drought. The wonderful way the state of California manages its water. Instead of trying to help people and be educated and say we all have to use less water, we all have to do these things properly and deep watering our trees and not so much throwing the shallow water on the turf and not relying on how much rain we get each year to how we are going to behave. Unfortunately, that's what the state does. And so when people tell you you have to stop watering their grass, they also stop watering their trees. One of the things we designed was we called stealth tree watering, where we have people dig a 12-inch wide excavation of their lawn and putting a soaker hose in that spiral excavation, covering it with mulch, and then very slowly turning on the water so it bleeds out very slowly and drips into the ground and actually does go into the soil without greening up the grass next to it. And the mulch helps cover it so no one can see it and they can keep their trees alive. Because as soon as people cut off the water to their lawns, they're cutting off the water to their trees as well. And unfortunately, most of the trees have learned to rely on that water from the turf watering.
And that tree may not even be in the turf. It may be adjacent to it, but a tree's roots can travel a long way, and they'll go a long way to find water.
Correct. And one of the problems we have with most of our nursery stock is that they're grown in containers, and more people are trying to use air pruning to stop the roots from circling. But as soon as we pull a tree out of a container, we can see all the roots that have circled. And if we're fortunate, and the people growing it, every time they moved it from a smaller container to the next larger one, they actually did root pruning to get rid of the circling roots. The only roots we have to deal with at planting are that last layer of circling roots, where we have to either prune them or something, because they don't just go, I'm free, I'm out of the container. They stay right where they're at, even after we pull them out. And the people that just stick it in the ground like a wine cork, the tree is going to continue to grow in a circle. And the first thing I do when I visit people's property with young trees is I give the tree a little shake. I grab it anywhere from 12 to 30 inches above the ground and wiggle it. And if I can see the container size moving in the ground, the tree is not rooting well. And the choices we have then are we can root prune it right then. If it's been really recent, we could pull it out and transplant it, or we could try transplanting it's been for a while and root pruning it and replanting it with a much more healthy structural root system.
We'll have a link in the show notes today about the correct way to plant a tree. And you have to pay attention to the hole. I think the old saying is dig a $10 hole for a $5 tree or something along those lines. But basically, that hole should be wide, not necessarily deep, but wide. And when you plant that tree, to maybe, if those roots are going round and round in that root ball, is to score the root ball with a sharp object on four sides and maybe across the bottom, and try to spread the roots out so that they will go out and help fill in that space that you just dug out, like a 6-foot diameter, maybe 10, 12 inches deep. It depends on the size of the container that you're planting. And by the way, don't plant your trees in containers. Take them out of the container first.
Yes. And, it's really interesting. The Sacramento Tree Foundation has had this pedestal method of planting trees pretty much for the last 30 years. And when I brought that up at the industry standards meeting, my coworkers and my professionals around the country called it a boutique planting method, which kind of shocked me because our volunteers do that all the time with very little training. When you dig the hole too deep and put the soil back on it, we can't compact it to the type of aerated density that it was before we excavated it. And so the tree will settle. And one of the number one ways to kill trees is to plant them too deep. So the pedestal method is we take the tree out of the container, we measure what the depth of the root ball is, Then we dig where the tree is going to go to only that height, or even that height less 1 inch.
Mm-hmm.
And then around that pedestal where that tree is going to sit, you can go as crazy as you want with your excavation. We usually recommend at least 2 times the root ball diameter, but you can go 3, 4, 5 times root diameter. And outside of the pedestal, you can dig deeper. And if you have a hard pan outside the pedestal, you could punch through the hard pan so the water can actually drain the planting hole. And you can create a really wonderful environment for your tree to grow. And because we're talking about organic matter and things, a lot of the soils we have don't have organic matter, and that's where the mulch we're putting on comes in. And then when we water the tree, the only roots the tree has, whether it's a balled and burlap or a container, is the roots that are moved onto the site. So we have to keep that root ball moist, and then we have to slowly expand the moisture outside the root ball so the roots can grow outside the root ball. And the more we loosen and break up the soil and digging those bigger holes, the better the air and water can actually flow in what was the original compacted soils in most developed neighborhoods or sites.
Many people, when they're planting a tree, they want to do the tree a favor, and they buy some really nice potting mix and don't replace the native soil there. Instead, they'll just fill it with potting mix soil. That can be a negative, can't it?
Can be. The bigger the hole you dig and the more you mix in some of the potting soil, so you increase some of the organic matter in that really large site, the better off it is, because as the roots do grow with the soil genomics and biomes, they pull those things with them and they keep moving them through the soil. But I wouldn't replace it completely. I would just mix in some organic matter, maybe up to 8 or 10% at the maximum into the soils. And I would do it over the entire area that I dig out really large. And that may help the tree establish a little faster.
And you mentioned, too, that you add mulch, but that mulch is only a top dressing, correct?
Correct. If you're using topsoil, it usually is a combination of a silt loam, which will have both clay and loam in it. It will have some organic matter as well, light. You don't want heavy organic matter. You do want light organic matter, and then you add more to the surface and let it slowly get broken down and move through the soil.
Yeah, we should point out, too, that if you're adding compost to that hole, even if it's just 8 or 10%, compost tends to break down, so it's going to settle. So you do not want to plant compost beneath the tree. You want that pedestal to be the native soil, I would think.
Native unexcavated soil. You want that to be unbroken up, because as soon as we loosen it up and put it back in the hole, it does settle. The people that do root grinding and all that, they take the wood and the dirt and they grind it up into pulverized, and they usually mound it. And then with a couple of years, that mound is level because that stuff naturally settles.
Which is exactly why you need to replace mulch every few years, because it's a really a living thing, and it's breaking down. It's feeding the soil, so you're really helping out your trees and your shrubs when you do use a natural mulch like chipped and shredded tree branches. Now, one good tip I know for planting that tree at the correct level, where you want about 1 inch of the existing soil ball of the tree from the container above grade, is to lay your shovel across the hole. And then when you place that tree soil ball on that pedestal, you want that top 1 inch of the existing soil ball to be just about a little bit higher than your shovel.
Yes, and also once you take the tree out of the containers, sometimes the root ball starts to disintegrate. It's just, that's what soil does. It falls apart. It's not supposed to be packed together like a clay thing you make pottery out of. And so by having it higher, if you do get a little bit of the bottom to fall away, you still don't plant the tree too deep.
And I guess we should get into one reason why people like to plant trees is for privacy. I remember years ago during a technical advisory committee meeting at the Sacramento Tree Foundation, there was just this rush to try to find tall-growing, fast-growing, narrow trees for compact backyards to give people the privacy they wanted. And usually as a result, and this has been going on for 30, 40 years, they tend to plant the trees too close together to try to get instant privacy.
Yes, and even landscape architects, they're taking a site that has nothing and trying to make it look attractive. They're going to put the trees very close together just because you want to look nice. Otherwise, it looks like a desert with a couple trees on it. And so they do put things together. The only benefit about that is because they have so much irrigation, as the initial trees that we're going to keep on the site over time grow, they already have irrigation in place because they have additional irrigation for trees that will probably be removed because they're overplanted and they're growing the canopies together.
Causing all sorts of other problems, too, usually with fences because they tend to plant that row for a privacy screen way too close to a fence line.
Yes, and again, we think about what we're doing from our side of the fence and not the other side of the fence. And if you're a property owner and your tree is growing onto my property, I have the right to prune it back to the fence line as long as I don't kill the tree and don't do too aggressive pruning. And if you want to keep the tree with the kind of a balanced canopy or a balanced crown, it should be planted a little bit in from the edge of the fence. Plus, then the roots are going to have less impact. And if I do have to do root pruning and put a barrier in, the earlier in the tree's life I do that, and the farther from the trunk I do that, the more natural root system I'm going to have with that tree as it grows bigger. The worst time to root prune is when the tree has got large woody roots, because if we cut that root close to the tree, everything that extends outward from the point we cut is lost.
Yeah, and those trees could be supporting each other.
Yeah, sometimes the roots do graft together, but the biggest thing is when we do work on our trees, we want to avoid unplanned failures. We can do things to improve the soil and do things to help improve the health of the tree. Sometimes we do add some fertilizer with our organic matter, but for the most part, we can try and keep these trees growing, especially with water and organic matter, but we can't stop unplanned failures once we've taken away the structural support the tree has. And one way you can look at this with a great model is you can put a wine glass on a cocktail plate or a dinner plate. When you take trees out of the field-grown trees and ball them burlap, they're basically taking the tree that was the cocktail plate and coming out with the wine glass or the champagne flute base. And when we start root pruning, if you chip away the base of a wine glass or a champagne flute, you'll see how little you have to take off for that thing to fall over. The only difference between that model and a tree is the flute or wine glass fall in the direction of the chipping and the tree falls away from the root pruning usually.
Let's take our pruning talk above the soil level and talk about what people are doing to their trees as far as pruning goes. A lot of people don't know the difference between a heading cut and a thinning cut when it comes to pruning. And most people are just doing heading cuts, chopping a tree willy-nilly to get to the height they want with little regard for the health of the branch that's left over, which usually, when you do that, you end up with many, many more branches coming out of that cut that are all more weakly attached.
They're more weakly attached and are growing so close together that they can't grow to maturity without pushing on each other. One of the features of that is included bark, where they grow and smash into each other. And then when those tree branches actually fail, you can examine the top and see there was no connection in the top anywhere from a quarter to a half of the way those branches are touching each other. The best way to prune a tree is to allow it to grow naturally. And because we're allowing our trees to grow mostly in open areas, they're growing a little wider than they would and taller and skinnier than they would in the forest when they might be close together. And so what you really want to do is you want to take away the end weights on some of the branches that reduces the loading. When we get branch failures, it's because the weight and loading of the branch is stronger than the attachment. So when we have those heavily overpruned trees that are basically the hard heading cuts and the branches sprout together and aren't thinned out, the attachment is not complete, as I explained earlier. And so at some point they do fail, which is really unfortunate because when the branches break without pruning, we lost all our pruning options. We now have this sheared off branch. We have to see if we can take away the shearing and still get the branch to grow. And then once the new branches do sprout out and the shoots sprout out, we have to prune to manage them. And most nurseries, they grow trees like they take a baby tree and make it look like a mature tree. They strip up all the branches on the lower bark to a tuft on the top where they've topped the tree. When we get bigger woody branches and we make these large heading cuts and topping cuts, the likelihood of decay is much greater because the trees don't heal, they seal or cover, and it takes so long for their wound wood and their callus to grow over those pruning wounds that they expose that open wood to decay, which then can get into the tree and cause structural problems over the life of the tree. The other thing I'd love to talk about is, people have heard plant the right tree in the right place. That to me is a mantra from all the electric companies that have to prune to clear their wires as a way to avoid expending money pruning trees for their wire clearance. What really has to happen is trees are actually a wonderful community or an individual asset. What we want to do is we want to figure out why we're growing the tree to begin with. Then we're going to grow the right tree in the right place for the right purpose. So if we want the tree for shade or for screen or for flower or for fruit, they've done the iTree studies, which is probably since 2003, we've been getting results from iTree. It's a free computerized program that the Forest Service has sponsored with some of their research grants. And it's shown us that from the first 0 to 7 years of a tree growing, we don't get any benefits from the tree. We're investing money and time, and because the canopy is so small, we don't get any benefits back. The leaves are the worker bees on the trees, and the leaves are what do the photosynthesis and do the shade and do the air quality. And so if we can't grow the tree to maturity, the tree from 7 to 15 years starts to break even on its return on investments. And then from 15 to 20 years, we're starting to get a little bit. And 20 years to maturity is just pouring back the benefits with the crown size. And so if we can't grow the tree to maturity, we're never really achieving those benefits. So the idea is, how do we locate the tree so we move away the competing infrastructure and utilities? So if I have to fix a sidewalk, or if I have to fix a curb, or have to fix a underground line, whether it's electrical, water, sewer, gas, communications, I can do those repairs without having to cut so many roots that I have to take the tree out. Then I can grow that tree to maturity and still take care of all my infrastructure. So the idea is that we figure out why we want to plant the tree. Then we figure out what space we have. Then we determine which potential trees we could plant in that space. Then we look at the characteristics of those trees. Evergreen or deciduous, nice flowers, nice fall color, fruit if we're doing it for crops. And then we pick those trees and we actually try and have some diversity. So we don't have rows and rows of the same trees. Because those of us that have heard of Dutch elm disease, chestnut blight, emerald ash borer, eucalyptus borers, and lip psyllids, they're usually attracted to one species. So if we have a row of species, we just create a smorgasbord for either a current insect or an invasive insect. And if we look at the city of Milwaukee, who has some of the best records and best research from some great research professors in Wisconsin, when Milwaukee got hit with their Dutch elm disease in the 1970s, it took until about 2020, about 50 years, for the canopy to restore itself. It was lost by the loss of all their elm trees. And if you look at the emerald ash borer cities in the Midwest, in the Northeast, and in southern Canada, they're going to be 30 to 50 years to restore their canopies that are lost from all the emerald ash borer damage to their ash canopies. And so what we really try to do is getting some diversity in place, maybe not have more than 2 like trees in a row, find trees that have similar canopies and crown shapes and fall color, and have a little bit of diversity in the species, but as similar a uniformity as humans seem to need.
And don't forget to maybe throw a few native trees into that mix as well.
Yes, and native trees are a great thing to have, and we have a great history with them. But as soon as we take that site and scrape all the soil off and compact it, there's no guarantee the native trees are going to do any better than any other tree. And if you look at the number of native trees we have in any ecosystem, if we only have 2 or 3 native trees, we can't have diversity. If we have 10 or 12 native trees, then we have a great palette to work from and we can share our native trees with a few introduced trees and have a wonderful, natural, and attractive landscape.
And again, we will use the term hydrozone, where you want to match up the watering requirements for the plants that you are irrigating.
Correct. And it's not just the hydrozone, it's the availability of water. In California, we get no natural rain typically from April till October. We might get an occasional rain. We're getting more a little bit the last couple of years, but they've just been a spritzer. And the rest of the time, and with the heat we get getting up into the 90s and the hundreds and triple digits, that water evaporates out and the trees do evapotranspiration pretty quickly. And so most of the artificial and supplemental watering that we do has to be repeated on a weekly to a 2-weekly basis. And that watering should be very slow and deep watering that goes deep into the soil and put on under the mulch. And then the mulch helps reduce the evapotranspiration and the evaporation from the soils that you talked about earlier, and helps the tree be longer between irrigation applications.
And again, that spiral you mentioned is a great idea, where you are laying down either a soaker hose or an inline drip irrigation tubing in a spiral that gets wider and wider as it goes out, so that the whole drip line of the tree, if you will, which extends from the trunk to the outer leaves, has the availability of water. Putting one little drip emitter next to the trunk of the tree is not doing the tree any good. It's like you mentioned earlier, that whole area needs equal amounts of water.
Yeah, one of the designs we've used when we were working with landscape architects is you actually can do concentric rings of drip hose, as you talked about, or you could use a bubbler and you create a basin so that bubbler fills the basin. And you start out with the basin right over the root ball, so the root ball stays alive, and slowly enlarge the basin as a tree grows, because it's not a Pope Hill Showtime grill, set it and forget it. It's a living thing that needs constant attention and maintenance. And hopefully, if we do it right, we're putting in small inputs, and as the tree gets bigger and bigger, we get more and more benefits from it.
Now, folks, you can take this conversation about trees and apply it to your children, by the way. The same rules apply.
Absolutely, Fred. You know, we don't just birth childs. We don't just plant trees. We grow them and we raise them. And you're 100% on that.
Yes, exactly. You want your trees to help take care of you when you're old. It's like that. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you want to talk about?
Last thing I would say is that you mentioned the term thinning earlier about pruning and thinning cuts. In 2017, we extracted the word thinning from the industry standards because humans have this thing that the trees need to be thinned. The leaves on the tree are the worker bees, and they perform everything. And since they're worker bees, if we compare the trees to a corporation where we have workers and productivity, if we take away a third of the foliage, and we were General Motors or Dodge or Ford, we just got rid of our night shift. If we take away 2/3 of the foliage, we got rid of our night shift and our swing shift. And those cruel people that top the trees, we got rid of all our workers. Who's going to build the cars? Who's going to do the photosynthesis? The trees can't go to the union hall and bring on new workers. The way they restore their leaves is they sprout from usually buds, and some are adventitious and some are they're buds that are on the trunk and on the branches, and they sprout from those. And they're trying to restore the number of workers that they lost. And the attachments from the sprouts are usually weakly attached because branches and trunk, the way they grow, and Dr. Alex Shigo showed us this back since 1977 or 78, that the trees, they overlap and their tissue overlaps from the trunk to the branches. And that's what holds those branches on so tightly. And when we do the heading cuts or the topping cuts and we get these sprouts, the branches are only attached by 1 or 2 years into these buds. And it takes, if they grow really fast, that they're trying to do to produce the foliage, they're weakly attached and they can fail. So the idea is to get rid of the word thinning from our vocabulary and talk about only remove a branch for a specific reason, for either the health of the tree or the structural integrity of the tree, or one of our human important needs like clearance for fire damage on homes, for visibility of traffic signals and street signs, and for making sure that we're not getting slapped in the face when we're looking down at our cell phones while we walk. And figuring out a way to manage the way the trees grow and allow them to grow by only removing anywhere from 5 to 18 to 20% of the foliage at any annual pruning on the tree, unless it's a really critical need. And trees that maybe haven't pruned in a long time and have the risk of a branch failing, because the branch failing takes away our pruning options, whereas pruning well and keeping the natural shape of the tree looking like a tree full of foliage and dense foliage is the best way to grow the trees.
So what did we learn from Gordon Mann, consulting arborist, today? Well, it's Farmer Fred garden rule number 7. Everything you know is wrong, because just like in this little conversation here, what terms don't lead to correct pruning work? Things that we've been saying for years, like remove dying branches, remove diseased branches, remove crossing branches, and thin your trees. Basically, hold on. And what Gordon is saying is only prune what is necessarily good to prune.
You know, when we write the specs that say remove dead, dying, crossing, diseased branches. So if you have a dead branch, you may want to only prune it back a little bit and leave some habitat. Sometimes dead branches do that. Or you can remove the dead branch because it's not going to impact the health of the tree. But a dying branch, say 10% of the branch is dying, you gave me permission to remove the whole branch, even though you had to remove the 10% of dead branches. Disease branches, we have anthracnose and powdery mildew. And you have a diseased branch with those, and you gave me permission to go ahead and remove all those branches. Basically, you're getting a top tree when you thought you wanted a nicely pruned trees. Crossing branches it depends on your perspective. You look at the tree from the top, and every branch is crossing. It's really crossing and rubbing branches, and you want to try and first reduce some of those loading weights that gets it to separate from the rubbing. Or if they're crossing and their branches are covering the same area where we need the leaves to grow, maybe remove one of the two branches or pair of branches. But removing crossing branches, I can remove all of them or both of them. And then the last one would be and thinning. Thinning, again, you're just taking branches out of the tree, and the tree's going to regrow those because it has to grow them. And we used to say in the industry standards that you don't remove more than 25% of the foliage. And all the pruning specifications said remove up to 25% of the foliage. Really want to move anywhere up to 5 to 12 to 18% maximum, depending on the needs and the species of the tree. And we only want to move the branches that have to for end weight loading or critical safety issues. And that's a different approach than just go ahead and thin every tree 25% and make it look like you got a haircut at the barber. One of the best analogies I can relate to is for those of us that have significant others, that one of us goes to the barber and the other goes to a hairstylist. I go to a barber and I come out, and first I pointed to a picture on the wall to make him cut all my hair off like the guy in the picture. And when I walk out of the barbershop, everybody knows I got a haircut. When my lovely wife walks out of the hairstylist, she's probably paid 10 times what I pay. And she comes out, she goes, "What do you think?" I'm like, "Okay, what did they do? Your hair looks great. You know, which supermodel do you want to look like?" They don't look like an army sergeant that just came out of boot camp. They look like the nice head of hair with a beautiful style. And when my friends come out of hairstylists, their hair doesn't look like it's been cut. It just looks very attractive. And if we can kind of prune our trees that way, I think we'll be way ahead.
I hope you have a comfortable couch to sleep on.
I know.
We've been talking with Gordon Mann. He is a consulting arborist with the California Tree and Landscape Consulting Firm. He has a website called Mann with 2 N's, mannandtrees.com. If you don't know your trees, if you don't know what kind they are, if you have questions about your trees, it pays to invest into a consulting arborist. Gordon Mann, thanks for setting us straight on trees today.
Opportunity, Fred. I always enjoy your show, and I really appreciate all you do to educate our public in the areas. And I'm glad you share your podcast with whoever can go online and listen to them.
Garden Basics with Farmer Fred comes out every Friday. Garden Basics is available wherever podcasts are handed out. For more information about the podcast, as well as an accurate transcript of the podcast, visit our website, gardenbasics.net. And thank you so much for listening and your support.